Now, the thing that I noticed when I got to Congress was that, I'm going to show you this. Many of you probably don't know what this is. I put it on the cover of my book. Believe it or not, this is the card that congressmen and congresswomen use to vote. There's a computer terminal at the end of a row of seats. You can see the little perforations here. So that when a bill comes up, all the names go up in lights. And if you say yes, a green light goes by your name. If you say no, it's a red light. If you're just present, it's an orange light. I put it in enough times. Don't forget, even on the Ronald, don't blame just the Democrats for spending. You know that, you probably will remember that even under Ronald Reagan, we had years in which the deficit was $200 billion. And I was very concerned about that. It's one of the reasons I went to Congress. But I couldn't believe how much worse it got and where it is today. We'll get into that in a minute. But when I put this in, I said, you know, every time I put this in, I am raising the national debt. Because we're not covering, you're not raising enough money to cover what we're spending. That's what a deficit is. And if you don't, you have to borrow. That's what they call the debt ceiling limit. It's got to be raised, otherwise you can't spend a dime. And you can't borrow the money to spend a dime. So I said, you know what? This is not a voting card. This is a credit card. In fact, in my book, Chapter 1, I call it the most expensive credit card in the world, a congressman's voting card. Here it is, okay? And that's the issue today. The money that we are borrowing from China, well, let me give you some numbers. Right now, as I stand here today, the national debt on the books, remember that phrase, is $12.8 trillion with a T. If you recall last year, the end of our fiscal year was September 30th, 2009. We spent $1.4 trillion more than we took in. Now, where did we get that money? We had to borrow it. And a lot of it came from countries like China, mainly from China. Guess what Obama told us it's going to be this year? And he tells it with a straight face. $1.5 trillion. And if he's saying it's $1.5 trillion, you know it's got to be more. Politicians never lowball those numbers. They're never going to tell you higher. They always lowball those numbers. Excuse me. Now, what's worse is he's told us that in the next 10 years we're going to add $10 trillion to the national debt. That means take $12 trillion, the number that we started with in the beginning of the year, and add 10, you're up to $22 trillion. Now, why is that dangerous? It's dangerous because you're going to pay interest on that. And we know that today, we are keeping interest rates artificially low. We don't have a real economy when it comes. You know what the Fed has done? We know that we almost went into a deep depression, and they had to do some serious manipulations. One of the biggest manipulations from the Fed, we still don't know how much because it's a black box. I substituted for Ron Paul on a rally in New York in front of City Hall, audit the Fed. Believe it or not, that has not passed. There is no audit of the Fed, so we don't know how much money they put out there and how much money really went in from the Fed to the bailout. But our interest rates, up until a couple of months ago, banks could borrow at the discount window for 0.25%, and they raised it to 0.75%. And they did that because they wanted the banks to lend the money to small business. A lot of them didn't do it. You know what they did? They bought intermediary treasury bills to earn 3 and 4%. That's why bank profits were so high. So we had a problem there. You can't force the private sector to do things, but when you bail them out, you would think the thing they would do is understand they had some obligation to bring this economy back and lend some money. They didn't do it. But when you consider interest of 5%, take your mortgage rate today, 5, 6%. That is artificially low. There is no doubt in my mind, and there should be no doubt in yours, that as they let this economy go back to a real-world economy, those interest rates will go up. I hope they'll go up like Jimmy Carter had. Some of you are old enough to remember 21% prime rate. That was Jimmy Carter. But let's say it went to 10, and hopefully it won't go any more than that. But we don't know. You're talking about 10% of $22 trillion. That is 2.2, let's say round numbers, $2 trillion in interest. Interest is the most expensive tax of all. It buys you nothing. In fact, it goes to people who lent you the money, and it will go to China in addition to the surpluses they have from their trading with us. This is dangerous. Very dangerous. And it's happening now. Listen, there's a debt bomb that's ticking right now in the world. You saw it go off in Greece. That might now be triggering problems with Portugal and Spain. And they say Italy has been a deficit spender besides. But you know what the worst is? Japan. We are sitting in the bleachers looking at what's going to happen to us in 10 years, and we've got to learn from this. Because Japan, for the last 15 years, refused to write down the bad loans on its books, and they deficit spent for 15 years. And Japan, within 10 years, 5 to 10 is predicted, 45% of their income will go just to pay the interest on their national debt. That is bankruptcy. Think about your credit card, and if you treated it that way.